Everybody like and subscribe, praise the bell icon. Story number 1.
It was a cold, rainy night when Jordan and his friends decided to head to the old, rundown arcade on the outskirts of town. It had been abandoned for years, but recently, rumors had been circulating that it was somehow back in business. The neon lights outside flickered erratically as they pulled into the parking lot. The place looked eerie, even from the outside. The windows were streaked with grime, and the door had an unsettling creak when they pushed it open. The inside of the arcade was dimly lit, the faint glow of machines providing the only source of illumination. The air was thick with the smell of stale popcorn and mildew, a stark contrast to the nostalgic scent of a typical arcade. It felt wrong, like they were walking into a memory that had been forgotten for far too long. Jordan's friends joked around, laughing at the ancient machines that lined the walls. Some of the games were rusted, their screens flickering with strange, distorted images. Others were completely dead, their buttons unresponsive. But there was one machine that caught Jordan's eye. Tucked away in the far corner of the room was a game he'd never seen before, one that seemed to hum with an unnatural energy. It was a vintage-looking cabinet, its wooden frame cracked and chipped. The screen glowed with a pale blue light, displaying an old-school title, The Final Game. The joystick was strangely inviting, as if beckoning him to play. The closer Jordan got to it, the colder the air became, a chill creeping down his spine. Something about the machine felt off. His friends dared him to play, egging him on with laughs and taunts. With a deep breath, Jordan slid a quarter into the slot and pressed the start button. The screen flashed and then went completely black. For a moment there was silence, broken only by the sound of static. Then the game began. The graphics were surprisingly advanced for an old machine, but the characters moved unnaturally, like they were being controlled by something other than code. The music, a haunting melody, seemed to echo from the screen itself, filling the room with a sense of unease. As Jordan played, the game grew darker. The levels became harder, the enemies more relentless. Sweat beaded on his forehead as he struggled to keep up. Then something strange happened. One of the enemies on screen seemed to look directly at him, its eyes glowing an unnatural red. The game froze for a moment, and Jordan felt a cold hand on his shoulder. He whipped around, but no one was there. His friends were still laughing, not noticing anything strange, but Jordan couldn't shake the feeling that something was watching him. The game continued, and suddenly the screen flickered, showing a disturbing image, a scene of the arcade, but it was twisted. The walls were cracked, the lights flickered like dying stars, and in the shadows, strange figures moved. One of them was standing right behind Jordan. He could feel its presence, a cold, suffocating weight that made it hard to breathe. He turned again, faster this time, but still no one was there. His heart pounded in his chest as he returned his gaze to the screen. The game was no longer just a game. It was alive. The joystick moved on its own, guiding his character through levels Jordan hadn't even unlocked yet. With each passing second, the atmosphere grew more oppressive. The arcade, once filled with the sounds of laughter and excitement, now felt like a tomb. The static buzzed louder, the game's music more discordant, like a warning. Jordan's hands were trembling, his pulse racing. He wanted to quit, but the game wouldn't let him. The screen displayed a message. "You're almost there." He tried to pull away from the machine, but it felt like his fingers were glued to the joystick. His body trembled as the game continued its maddening progression. The final level appeared, and the enemies were more grotesque than anything Jordan could have imagined. The characters seemed to twist and contort, their faces no longer human, their eyes hollow. At the final moment, the screen went black again, and the eerie music stopped. A single line of text appeared in red, "You lost!" Suddenly, the arcade's lights flickered one last time and went out completely. The only sound was the hum of the machine, still glowing in the darkness. Jordan felt a cold breath on his neck, followed by a voice, soft, guttural, and unmistakably from the game. "You shouldn't have played." Panicked, Jordan wrenched himself away from the machine, but as he did, his friends turned to him, their faces pale and lifeless, their eyes vacant. They were still, unblinking. It was as if they were no longer human. The arcade had swallowed them whole, turning them into something else, something far darker. He bolted for the door, but it slammed shut before he could reach it. He screamed, his voice echoing off the walls, but no sound came out. The only thing that remained was the flickering light of the arcade machine, its hum growing louder, as though it had become the heartbeat of the place itself. That was the last time anyone saw Jordan. Some say they found him, sitting in front of the machine, his face frozen in terror. Others say he was never found at all. But one thing's for sure, the arcade is still there, waiting for its next victim. And the game is always ready to play.
Story number 2.
It had always been a tradition for the local kids to hang out at the arcade after school. For as long as anyone could remember, it had been the center of their social lives, a place to blow off steam and immerse themselves in the world of flashing lights and endless rows of games. The place had an energy, a buzz that felt alive, as though it was part of the town's heartbeat. But that was before the incident with Adam. Adam wasn't like the others. He was quiet, kept to himself mostly, a kid with a distant look in his eyes. His friends would often joke about how he seemed too serious when they all crowded into the arcade, but Adam was always there, playing the games with a strange intensity. The others laughed it off, but after a while, they began to notice something odd. The arcade's machines had started to malfunction in ways that weren't typical. At first, it was subtle. A screen would glitch, or a joystick would stick for a few seconds. But then the changes became more noticeable, more eerie. The machines would make odd noises when no one was playing them. Low, mechanical growls or a soft whisper that no one could understand. The kids thought it was just an old building, filled with old equipment. But Adam noticed something different. It was the game he always played, The Haunting, a survival horror game that seemed to pull him in every time he sat down. The game had been in the arcade for years, one of the oldest, but it was also one of the most popular. No one knew who had made it, and no one had ever completed it. The storyline was simple. Navigate through a haunted house, solve puzzles, and avoid creepy, shadowy figures. But there was something about it that felt wrong. Adam was determined to beat it. Every day, he would sit in front of The Haunting, his face pale and focused, his fingers moving in a blur as he navigated through the levels. The other kids thought it was just a game, but Adam's obsession grew. He started staying later and later at the arcade, until the owner, an elderly man named Mr. Jenkins, had to tell him to leave. One evening, just before the arcade closed, Adam was still there, sitting in front of The Haunting as the machines powered down for the night. Mr. Jenkins walked past, patting Adam on the shoulder. He didn't get a response. When he turned around, Adam's eyes were wide open, but there was no sign of recognition. His fingers were still moving the joystick, but the screen showed nothing. It was completely black. Mr. Jenkins tried to pull him away, but Adam resisted, gripping the joystick with an unnerving strength. That's when the lights flickered, and the arcade machine buzzed to life. The screen flashed with a horrific image, a figure standing in a dark hallway, its silhouette distorted and menacing. Then the figure's face appeared, its features twisted in a grotesque, unnatural way. It was a face Adam recognized. It was his own. The image shifted, becoming more and more distorted, like a mirror that reflected something that wasn't quite real. The game started to glitch wildly, the sounds now full of static and horrifying whispers. The walls of the arcade seemed to shake. The floor creaked underfoot, and the air turned cold, like the room was closing in on them. Mr. Jenkins grabbed Adam, pulling him away from the machine, but the kid wouldn't let go. The grip was like steel, and Adam's expression never changed, his eyes vacant and glazed. That's when it happened. The screen on The Haunting flickered one last time before showing a message that made Mr. Jenkins' blood run cold. He's here. You can't escape now. With that, the arcade lights went out completely. The next morning, the police arrived to find the arcade in chaos. All the machines had powered up on their own, and there were reports of strange sounds heard in the building, like someone or something was moving between the rows of games. But the strangest part was Adam. He was sitting in front of The Haunting, his body motionless, eyes wide open but empty. His fingers were still curled around the joystick, but he wasn't playing the game anymore. His skin was pale, his lips blue, as though all life had been drained from him. No one knew what happened that night. No one knew why the arcade machines continued to hum with energy or why the haunting was still running, its screen showing nothing but static now. The authorities shut down the arcade, but the story didn't end there. Kids who had gone to the arcade started talking about hearing strange noises late at night, whispers in the dark, and the sound of a joystick clicking when no one was around. And every so often, when someone walked by the closed arcade, they could see a flicker of light through the dusty windows, like someone was still playing. They say that if you stand close enough to the arcade after dark, you can hear it, the faint sound of a game starting up, and then the unmistakable, terrifying whispers of the haunting. And some believe, if you listen long enough, you can hear Adam's voice too, trapped inside the machine, begging to be freed.
Story number 3.
It was supposed to be a fun, nostalgic night for Max and his friends. They'd heard about a new arcade that had opened up, a place that was said to have all the classic games, the ones that had been lost to time, the kind of games they used to play when they were younger, back before everything became digital and modern. They were excited to relive the good old days, to reminisce about the simpler times. But from the moment they stepped inside, something didn't feel right. The arcade was dimly lit, its neon lights casting strange shadows that seemed to move with a life of their own. The air was thick with the smell of old carpeting and something faintly metallic, like blood. The place felt old, older than it should have been. Max glanced around, noticing that the walls were covered in peeling wallpaper, the edges curling as if they hadn't been touched in years. But the machines, they were pristine, gleaming as if they had been recently polished, their screens glowing invitingly. There was something unsettling about the atmosphere, but Max shrugged it off. His friends were already at the machines, excitedly putting in their quarters and competing for high scores. The familiar chime of game start sounds and the constant hum of the arcade made him feel a little more at ease. But then, out of the corner of his eye, he saw it. In the back corner of the arcade, there was a machine he didn't recognize. It wasn't just an old game, it was strange. The cabinet was black, smooth and glossy, the screen a deep, unnatural shade of red. The title on the machine read Blood Moon in jagged, dripping letters. Max approached it cautiously, a sense of dread beginning to grow in his chest. There was no way he'd ever seen a game like this before, not in any arcade, not anywhere. He turned to ask his friends if they'd seen it, but they were lost in their own games. Hesitant but curious, Max dropped a quarter into the slot and pressed start. The screen flickered and then went black. For a long moment, nothing happened. Max stood there, staring at the machine, wondering if it was broken. But then slowly the screen illuminated again with a distorted image of an old, desolate town. There were no people, just abandoned streets, broken windows, and the eerie silence that made the place feel like it had been forgotten by time itself. Suddenly, the screen changed. A figure appeared in the middle of the street. It was a man, tall and dressed in tattered clothes. His face was obscured by shadows, but Max could see something glimmering in the darkness. Two small, gleaming eyes staring back at him. The man began to move toward the screen, each step slow and deliberate. As he got closer, Max felt a cold chill run through him, like someone had just brushed their fingers against the back of his neck. He stepped back, but his body refused to move. He was frozen in place. Then the man spoke, his voice low and rasping, like it came from far away, from a place where the air itself was thick with despair. "You're next." Max's heart raced. He tried to move, to rip himself away from the machine, but it was as if the game had a hold on him, pulling him in deeper. His fingers gripped the joystick, but his movements were sluggish, unnatural. The screen began to distort again, flickering wildly as the image of the man blurred. The ground beneath Max seemed to shift, as if the arcade itself was warping around him. He could hear faint whispers now, voices that seemed to come from all directions, murmuring things he couldn't understand. And then he saw it. On the screen, the man was no longer alone. Figures began to emerge from the shadows, crawling from the ground, their faces twisted in grotesque smiles, their bodies contorted in impossible angles. They were coming for him, their hands reaching out of the screen, desperate to pull him in. Max's breath caught in his throat as the whispers grew louder, more frantic. "You can't escape." Max's hands trembled as he tried to break free, but he couldn't. The joystick seemed to stick, as if something was holding it down, forcing him to play. His vision blurred as the arcade around him distorted further, the walls warping, the lights flickering, and the air growing thick with a heavy, suffocating pressure. He could hear his friends in the background, laughing, still oblivious to what was happening. But Max couldn't break away from the machine. His body felt heavy, as if something was draining him, taking his very will. The man on the screen got closer, his eyes now glowing, an unnatural hunger in them. The figures behind him reached out, clawing their way toward Max. "You're next." Max felt his heart race as the figure's hand reached through the screen, his fingers now brushing against Max's face. He let out a scream, his entire body shaking with fear, but no sound came out. He was trapped. The next morning, when his friends finally noticed Max wasn't there, they came to check on him. They found him still in front of the Blood Moon machine, his eyes wide open, staring blankly at the screen. His body was cold to the touch, and his hands were still gripped tightly around the joystick. But he wasn't breathing. They called for help, but by the time the paramedics arrived, Max was already gone. No one could explain what happened to him. The police found no signs of foul play, no cause of death that made sense. The only clue was the arcade machine itself. The game was still running, the title screen flickering with that same eerie red glow. When they tried to unplug it, the machine wouldn't turn off. It kept running, the distorted images of the man still appearing on the screen, waiting for the next victim. And to this day, the arcade is closed, abandoned, and forgotten. But some nights, if you walk past the building, you can still hear the faint sound of static, the whispers in the dark, and the unmistakable sound of a joystick clicking, as though something is still playing.
Story number 4.
The old amusement park had been closed for years, but every local in town had their own story about it. It was one of those places that everyone knew about, but no one ever really talked about. Until one day, a group of teenagers decided to sneak in. They'd heard the rumors, the whispers of strange things happening inside. Stories of strange noises in the dead of night, lights flickering on and off, and sometimes, if you were unlucky enough, the rides would start up on their own, running through the night with no one to control them. Alec, Vanessa, and Tom had grown up hearing these stories, but to them, it was just a part of growing up in a small town, something they laughed about at parties. Until one fateful summer evening, they decided to put their courage to the test. They'd heard that a new family had moved into town and that the park was still accessible, hidden behind a thick overgrowth of trees and vines, but it was still there, and it was as good a place as any to go exploring. By the time they arrived, the sun was setting, casting long shadows over the old Ferris wheel that loomed in the distance, its once proud frame now rusted and covered in creeping ivy. The merry-go-round, long silent, had a dull, eerie gleam to it as the wind stirred the faded, chipped horses. The air was thick with the smell of mildew and rot, but beneath it there was something else, a faint, strange sweetness, like candy, but mixed with something sour and pungent. Alec led the group toward the entrance, an old, rusted gate that seemed to open on its own when he pushed it. The others hesitated for a moment before following. The moment they stepped inside, the temperature dropped. It wasn't the chill of the evening air. It felt unnatural, like the park was breathing, pulling the warmth from their bodies. Vanessa was the first to notice the sounds, soft, distant at first, but growing louder as they ventured deeper into the park. Faint laughter, high-pitched like children playing. But the laughter wasn't right. It was too hollow, too distant. And the way it echoed through the empty park made their skin crawl. There was something wrong, something twisted in the air. "Did you hear that?" Tom asked, his voice trembling. Alec and Vanessa exchanged uneasy glances, but Alec tried to shake it off. "It's probably just the wind," he said, but even his voice had lost its usual confidence. He tried to focus on the path ahead, but the sounds of the laughter were becoming harder to ignore. It seemed to be coming from all around them now. The group made their way toward the center of the park, where a large, decaying hall of mirrors stood. The building was warped, its glass cracked and filthy, reflecting distorted shapes of the world around them. As they approached, a door creaked open slowly by itself, inviting them inside. Vanessa was the first to step in. Her breath caught in her throat. The mirrors inside were nothing like they'd imagined. The reflections of the room bent and twisted in unnatural ways. Where there had been nothing a moment before, figures started to emerge in the mirrors. They were children, pale, with dark eyes and twisted smiles. They didn't move like normal people, their bodies contorting in ways that shouldn't be possible. Alec and Tom backed away, their hearts pounding in their chests. The room seemed to stretch, the walls expanding, narrowing, and then expanding again, as if the mirrors themselves were alive, playing with them. The laughter grew louder, now sharp and clear, echoing all around them, pressing in from every direction. A sharp, sudden bang rang out from the back of the room, and a figure appeared, tall, impossibly tall, with hollow eyes. It was dressed in old carnival attire, its face a twisted, grotesque grin that seemed to stretch too wide, like it was pulled from a nightmare. The figure didn't move, but the laughter surged again, now filling the room until it was deafening. Alec turned to run, but the door had vanished. The mirrors around them warped and twisted, the reflections now of things they couldn't comprehend. Twisted faces, contorted limbs, things that had once been human but were no longer. The walls seemed to close in, the laughter pounding in their ears like a drumbeat. Vanessa screamed, her voice cutting through the laughter, but no sound came out. Her mouth moved, but her voice was stolen by the air, which now felt thick, suffocating. The floor beneath them cracked, and suddenly, the room was no longer a room. It was a maze, with walls that seemed to change every time they looked away. They couldn't tell which way they'd come from or where they were going. The path ahead was swallowed by darkness, the sounds of the laughter following them wherever they went. Tom was the first to fall behind. He stopped running, his face pale, his eyes wide with fear. Something was wrong with him. He wasn't moving like himself. He was staring at something, his body frozen, trembling. Vanessa and Alec rushed back, but when they reached him, they found that his eyes were wide open, but there was no recognition in them. He was no longer the Tom they knew. Something had taken him. Something had twisted him into a hollow shell of who he once was. Alec grabbed Vanessa's arm and pulled her away, the laughter still pounding in their heads, the figures in the mirrors still mocking them. They finally found the exit. But when they reached the gate, it wouldn't open. It had disappeared, swallowed up by the park, as if it was never there at all. They were trapped. And just as they thought they had no hope left, the figure in the carnival costume appeared in front of them, its eyes dark and endless. The laughter stopped. It leaned in close, its mouth opening impossibly wide. "You'll never leave," it whispered. And then everything went dark. The next morning, the amusement park was gone. It was as if it had never been there. There were no signs of Alec, Vanessa, or Tom. No one could remember the park ever existing. But sometimes on quiet nights, the locals swear they can hear distant, high-pitched laughter carried by the wind. And sometimes, if you stand in just the right place, you might catch a glimpse of something in the shadows, a figure in tattered carnival clothes, waiting.